Hi everyone, welcome to the Culinary Institute of America. My name is Robert Tremblay. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at the college, as well as a 2010 graduate. And today we're going to be working with one of my all-time favorite proteins. We're going to be working with brisket. Now, brisket is really a very versatile type of meat. It comes from beef, obviously. However, it comes from the front section of the cow, so right through the chest area. So it's in a very high activity part of the cow, which makes it kind of a tough piece of meat. Traditionally, when you encounter a brisket, if you're buying it in a store, if you're going directly to a butcher, it's going to come in a couple of different variations. So typically what they'll do is they'll take the full brisket, which can be up to 20 pounds in certain instances, so it's a really large piece of meat. But it'll either come in either the flat piece or it's going to come in the point piece. So when we talk about the flat piece, that's actually the type of cut that I have right here in front of me. You can see it's a very streamlined piece of meat. It's very uniform in terms of its size and its diameter. When we talk about the point piece, it's actually a much larger and carries a large piece of fat cap on top of it. So in terms of what you're going to utilize the brisket to do is how you're going to decide which part of the brisket that you want to do. Now, some chefs are actually able to utilize the full brisket using both the flat portion and the point piece, but it just depends on what you're going to be using it for. So like I said, it is very versatile. You can take it and you can barbecue with it, which is kind of the holy grail of briskets as far as I'm concerned, putting it on a smoker for hours on end and letting it cook down that way. You can also cure it in a brine and do sort of corned beef or pastrami, working around the holidays of St. Patrick's Day. Corned beef is obviously a staple for that, but literally with that, you're actually pickling the beef to be able to do that. And then you're going to boil it and cook it that way in a braising capacity. When we talk about what we're going to do today, we're going to do more of a classic French braise on our brisket. So like I said, it's a very versatile piece of meat and we're able to do a number of different things with it. And so when we talk about a classic French braising technique, and to couple with one of my favorite all-time ingredients, we're going to do one of my all-time favorite cooking methods. And with braising, it's really a labor of love. There's a lot of steps in the process. It takes multiple hours to complete, but at the end, you're able to take a piece of meat that is really a very tough and inedible piece of meat in the beginning and turns it into something that you can sell for $20 or $30 in a restaurant. So taking something very inexpensive and really maximizing its quality and really maximizing its flavor and return on investment. So a really important element to it. So when we talk about the process of braising, we begin by really taking care of our meat. You can see that there's a nice layer of fat still remaining on our brisket. I went ahead and trimmed off some of the fat cap that was already there. As I mentioned before, the amount of fat that's going to be on it is going to vary from the end of the brisket that you're using. So with our case, we're using the flat end of the brisket, which is going to have a little bit more leaner cut to it, but there is going to be still a significant amount of fat. So depending on how you're going to prepare it is going to depend on how you're going to go about butchering your meat and clean it up ready for your presentation. So I already went ahead and took off some of the fat that we're going to need, but I wanted to leave a nice thin layer on top of it because the first thing we're going to do to this meat after we season it is get it into a pan and actually sear it. And we want to have that fat area there so that we can render that fat and incorporate those flavor profiles into what we're going to be making. So it all starts with the beef and then the way that we treat it in the beginning with that searing process, and we're going to take it through step by step from there. So to begin with, we want to make sure that our meat is dry. That is probably the most important first step because the only way to get proper caramelization and proper Maillard reaction in the pan is to make sure that your meat is dry, because that moisture is going to cause steam, which is going to reduce the temperature and the ability for you to get that nice browning caramelization. So when we talk about searing meat off, we want to make sure that we're starting off with a really nice dry piece of meat. So I'm going to just use some paper towel here to dry off the meat. And you want to make sure that you get both sides of it, so that way you're able to sear on all sides and get a nice even sear on everything. Okay. So we're just going to discard our paper towel. I'm going to take off one of our gloves so that we can season our meat. So we're just going to start off with salt and pepper. There's not going to be a whole lot of explosion flavor profiles, no real spices or intensity that way. This dish is about building flavors from the start to the very from the very start to the very end. So you're going to see as I start to incorporate more ingredients to this that we're going to really build some nice flavor profiles for ourselves. So we're going to start off, we're just going to do some salt and pepper on all the sides, and you really want to be very liberal with the salt here. This is a really thick piece of meat. It has a lot of fat running through it, very high activity animal, so you want to make sure that you give enough seasoning so that it permeates through the entire piece of meat and will carry through to the very end. So one of my first chefs at one of the restaurants I worked in after going through the program at CIA used to say you want to make it snow salt when you're working with a nice thick piece of meat. So that's what I always imagine when I'm seasoning my beef for that. So, and a little bit of pepper, and then we're just going to roll it through again through our residual. All right, so now the next really important step, like I said, is searing our meat. So I've already got our burner going. You want to get your pan really nice and scalding hot so that way you get a nice initial sear on the meat, and then we'll control our temperature from there. So for our fat, what we're going to use is just some standard vegetable oil. The reason we want to use a vegetable oil in this instance is because it has a very high smoke point. And when we're searing with meat, we want to make sure that our oil isn't going to scorch. So using something like whole butter in this instance that has a lot of milk fat has a tendency to burn on a high heat. So you want to make sure that you're using an oil that will work well in this instance. You can use clarified butter where you actually take out that additional milk fat to sear in, which is a very classic French way to do things. But we're just going to simplify it with some vegetable oil. So I'm going to go ahead and get that into our rondeau here. And you really don't need too much. You really just want enough to be able to coat the pan here. So we're just going to move that around a little bit. And so, like I said, you just want enough so that it glistens on the bottom of the pan. And so what we're going to begin with in terms of searing this meat is we're going to start with the fat side down first, as I said before, because we want to render out all of that delicious fat that's in the meat itself, and that's going to help flavor the rest of our dish as we move on forward. So as our pan comes up to temp, and so now we've got our pan up to temperature, so we're going to go ahead and lay in our brisket. I'm sure you can hear that hard sear. That's exactly what we want. You want to give it a nice firm press down to the base of the pan so that way you're getting that constant surface area coverage of your beef. You want to make sure that you're getting it nice and even on all sides. Now, initially you're going to have that first hard sizzle and you're going to let it sit for just a little bit. And then as you start to see the temperature in the pan grow, because we just put in a fairly cold piece of meat, which is going to drop that initial temperature. Once it gets back up to temp, you're going to want to turn down your temperature just a little bit so that you're on more of a medium-high flame or temperature, so that way you can monitor the caramelization. We don't want to overdo this. We're really just looking to get a nice golden brown color on the bottom of our meat. One of my first chefs here at CIA used to refer to it as GB&D, which is a very technical term for golden brown and delicious. So you want to have that kind of visualization in your mind of what you're looking for. And one other thing that's really important is when you're caramelizing and searing meat is that you want to put it in a pan and don't constantly move it. The only way you're going to get that caramelization is if you leave it in the pan and let that heat do its thing. Once you start to cook those sugars and they start to caramelize, they're actually going to naturally release on their own. If you start to try to move them too soon, your meat's going to start to stick, you're going to get bits that break off. You really just want to let the heat do its thing. So now that our pan is ready to go and we've got our meat searing, what I want to do is take you through the rest of our ingredients and how we're going to build the rest of our dish, okay? So we'll get a nice zoom in here. So this is our mise en place. You always want to make sure to have your mise en place well organized so that it's easily accessible. And so like I said, we're going to be doing a classic French combination of flavors here. So we have our classic mirepoix, which is a combination of 2 parts onion. So right here I've got about a cup of onion here, as well as 1 part celery and 1 part carrot. So you're going to have about a half a cup of both celery and carrot to the 1 full cup of the onion itself. So with these, you just want large dice. We don't have to get too intricate with our knife cuts here because we're not going to be presenting these to the customer. They're about the flavor elements that we're putting into the dish. So these are going to be our aromatics. They're really going to bring a nice floral element, and we're going to caramelize them to go along with the caramelized meat that we have going in the pan. We also have some dry red wine. This is actually Merlot. I'll talk a little bit about some substitutions for that once we get to that portion of the program. And then we also have some tomato paste. And then we also have some brown veal stock here. About 28 fluid ounces is what you're gonna need for about a pound of meat. That's what we're doing today. We also have some dry bay leaves and some whole butter for later on in the process, which we're gonna get to that just in a little bit later on. So we're just about ready to flip to the next side of our brisket, which we've got searing. So I just want to show you kind of what color we're looking for on this. Remember what I said before, we're looking for a nice caramelization, a nice golden brown color, which is exactly what we have. That fat cap that we left on, that little bit that's still left there, rendered out into the pan, so that's going to develop some nice flavor for us. And then we're going to continue to sear. So we want to rotate from that main first side to one of the adjoining sides, and then you just want to lead it up to the side of the pan. We don't want to get carried away and cook the other elements of the brisket. We want to go side by side. So like I said in the beginning, it's really a labor of love, and you can really already start to see the fond that's developing in the bottom of the pan. That's what we refer to as those brown bits. That is the love that goes into the rest of this dish. We're going to get to the deglazing portion later on, which is really going to pull up those brown bits and really have some really intricate flavor details and nuttiness going into our dish. So at this point, I'm going to lower the temperature a little bit. Like I said before, we want to maintain a nice golden brown color on this. We don't want our pan to continually get too hot, because that beautiful fond and those brown bits that we've developed on the bottom of the pan can start to scorch if you leave it at too high a temperature. So after that initial sear on that first side, it's going to intensify the temperature of the pan, and you want to make sure that you moderate that to go along so you maintain that nice brown color. All right, so skip ahead a little bit. So we've got almost all of our sides done. You can see the beautiful golden brown color that we've got everywhere. We're just gonna flip to our final side and get a nice hard sear on that as well. So you can see all of the brown bits, that fond that we've got growing at the bottom of the pan. We've maintained that nice brown color, which is what we're looking for. And you can see on all sides it's evenly colored as well. So it's all about getting your meat perfectly dry ahead of time, giving it a nice seasoning to go into the pan with, and then making sure that you monitor your temperature. Those are the key elements to perfectly brown meat. All right, so now we've got our meat seared perfectly. I'm gonna turn down our heat a bit just while we get it out of the pan. You can see we've got that golden brown color on all of our sides, and so we're just gonna take it off out of our pan and let it rest to the side. Beautiful piece of meat right there. And so next we're going to continue in this pan. So one of the big important parts of this is, as I said in the beginning, the building of our flavors. So we started off with searing our meat. We've got all that beautiful fond in the bottom of the pan. We rendered out some of the fat from the beef, and now we're gonna start to build from there with our aromatics. As I said before, going through our ingredients, we've got our mirepoix that we're gonna start off with, and we're gonna brown this as well. So the brown bits that we have from our meat is going to incorporate with the caramelization of our aromatics as well, our mirepoix, and we're going to build from there. So start off with what I'm going to do is throw in our carrots. Now, one of the most important things we do here at CIA is talk about product knowledge. You know, we don't go through a process where students sit around memorizing recipes all day. We actually go through the process of understanding the science and the procedure behind what we're doing through each step in a recipe and through that process. And in addition to that, we focus very heavily on product knowledge and understanding our ingredients. So when we look at mirepoix, a lot of cooks will take all three of these and put them in at the same time and start to caramelize them. Definitely saves time, but in terms of the cooking process, it's gonna take a lot longer to cook our carrots properly than it's going to cook our celery and our onions. So what we really wanna do is start off with our carrots and let them get started going in the pan first, and then we'll throw in our onions and our celery. So that way they come together and they caramelize at the same temperature and at the same time. Otherwise, if we started off with all three in the pan, you can end up with some burnt onions and celery and have carrots that aren't cooked all the way through properly. So we're just gonna get these into the pan, okay? And we're gonna start that caramelization process. Now, we're gonna add just a touch of salt to this. We don't wanna add too much because salt is going to pull moisture out of our ingredients. And what we learned before from talking about the searing of our meat and the caramelization of those sugars, when we talk about moisture, it's really the death of caramelization. So what we want here is to have some seasoning because we want to take those aromatics and pull out those flavors and those aromas, but we don't want to have too much moisture coming out of them, so that way we still get that nice caramelizing color. So again, we get them into the pan. We don't want to move them around too much. We just want them to cook in the fat and let them start to caramelize. So we've got our carrots going in the pan here. They've been cooking for about 2 minutes or so, already starting to develop some color. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and toss in the rest of our aromatics, the rest of our mirepoix. So we'll add in our celery, okay, and we're going to add in our onions as well. So like I said in the beginning when we were going over our ingredients, your typical ratio for mirepoix is going to be 2 parts onion to 1 part celery and carrot. So for a 1-pound brisket, we're doing about a cup of large diced onion to about a half a cup of carrot and a half a cup of celery. So you can already start to smell these aromatics coming together nicely, perfuming out of the pan. That's exactly what we want. And so we have that residual fat from our brisket that we're cooking these down in, so that's going to add flavor. And you can see the fond has already started to come up out of the pan and incorporate into our aromatics. And the reason for that is because, like I said before, that natural moisture and those natural elements coming out of our vegetables help deglaze the pan a little bit and keep them from burning. So what we're going to do in this instance is, by caramelizing our vegetables, we're going to then incorporate more fond and more browning to our pan and just continuing to develop flavors in this dish. So you can really see how from this one pot element that we're creating a lot of different flavor and really maximizing our flavor profiles here. We've got our mirepoix beautifully caramelized. We got some nice brown color on here. So the next step in the process is to actually build something which is called a pinage, which is really the incorporation of our browned mirepoix. We're going to add in some tomato paste, and then we're going to cook that through and get that to a nice golden reddish color, kind of a rusty color is what we're going for. This is a very traditional cooking method, making a pinage, typically used in the production of making like brown veal stock is very traditional in doing this, where you would actually use the fond in the roasting pan from the roasting of the bones that's going to go into the stock. You work in your mirepoix, and then you put in your tomato paste, and then you glaze with red wine. That's the exact same process we're going to do here, except we're doing it for the brisket dish and the development of our cooking liquid. So we're going to need about 2 ounces or so of tomato paste, which is about 4 tablespoons. So that's basically what we're putting in here now. You can eyeball it a little bit, doesn't have to be perfect. Add a little bit of seasoning here, not too much. Okay. Now we're just going to work in that tomato paste. So we want it to get all involved with our mirepoix, so that it's even distributed. And like I said, we want to cook this tomato paste out because it definitely can have a very tart flavor to it when it gets in there. So we want to brown it up. We want to get some caramelization, make it nice and sweet. And so you'll actually start to smell it when it starts to brown. Sort of takes on a smell characteristic sort of close to raisins almost. Or if you've ever had like sun-dried tomatoes, very similar aroma to those. Really all about getting that nice sweetness coming through out of the tomato paste itself. So just want to cook this through. Should only take about 2 to 3 minutes or so to get that cooked out nicely. Once you start to see the residual oil coming out of your vegetables and you start to see it be in that kind of ruby, rusty color, that's what we're looking for. So that's looking great. We've got some nice fond developing on the bottom of the pan here again. So now we're going to go ahead and deglaze our pan. We've got about 4 ounces of dry red wine. You want your pan to be pretty hot when you do that, because that initial jolt of heat once the wine gets in there is going to really help release those brown bits on the bottom of the pan. And what we're looking to do here is reduce this down. So we want to concentrate those flavors. We want to reduce our wine by about half. So that's going to intensify the acidity of the wine that's in here, which is going to really balance out the fattiness of our brisket. The wine is really an important step in the process. You can also use, in this instance, in addition to the red wine, is some demi-glace, which is a combination of brown veal stock and Espanol sauce, which is brown sauce, reduced by half, and that's sort of like a concentrated vehicle of love, to be quite honest, is the best way to describe it. It's a very similar type of flavor profile to the cooking liquid that we're making here, but it's intensified, so it's really reduced down. It's a great way to incorporate a lot of flavor into your dishes. So you can see our wine is cooking down nicely. It's coming together, and the smell-o-vision, I really wish there was smell-o-vision on our cameras nowadays. I'm sure Apple is pretty close to coming up with that, but the smells coming out of this pan right now are fantastic. You've got the wine mixing with the tomatoes and the caramelized aromatics that we have in here. Just all the beauty in the world. Like I said before, this is very much a labor of love. So one of my favorite things to do is to braise on a Sunday afternoon in the middle of the winter when football is on, and this usually takes anywhere between 3 to 4 hours to properly braise a brisket. So, you know, like I said, you're going to spend a lot of time doing this, but the end results are truly fantastic. And one of my favorite, one of the reasons that I love braising isn't just because you're able to take something that in its natural state doesn't seem very edible at all and turning it into something magical, but also it's the fact that it combines kind of a couple of different ways of cooking. You have your dry cooking method with the searing and working on that element, and then you also have the wet element, which we're going to get into in just a minute. So it's really a combo cook on your dish that really kind of helps you understand really a lot of varied sciences when we talk about food and working with ingredients. So our tomato paste is cooked perfectly, and what we're going to do next is we're actually going to go ahead and add our meat back into our pan here. Okay. Our beautifully seared beef. We want to make sure that we get the drippings that came out of the beef as well, because that is all flavor. And then we're going to add, one thing that I recommend is that before we're using some brown veal stock here, but you can use just straight beef stock. Okay. One thing that I recommend is that if you're going to use store-bought stock, which if you're making this at home is more than likely what you'll be using, what you want to do, and what I prefer to do, is if you're not able to find stock without any sodium in it, what you want to do is cut your traditional stock with some water. So that way you can control the sodium content, and your meat's not going to end up too salty at the end of braising the dish, because once we get this into the oven and it starts to cook down, all of that sodium is going to intensify. So that's why you didn't see me putting a ton of salt in at the very beginning and building through, because all of that seasoning that we added to our meat is going to concentrate and condense into the cooking liquid as we work forward. So very important part of that is controlling your sodium content from the very start of the cooking process to the very end. And so with the store-bought stock, just cut it with some water, helps you kind of manage that sodium content really easily. Now that we've got our brisket back into our pan with the cooking liquid, we want to make sure that we get this up to a simmer. I've already got our oven preheated to 275 degrees. That's the ideal temperature for braising. And within this, you want to make sure that your cooking liquid comes up about 2/3 of the way of your meat. So you can see that we've got our level at the right area. If it's a little bit less, just depending on the volume of the pan that you're using, you just add a little bit more liquid, but we really want to make sure that we have the majority of our beef covered with the liquid, so that way it has a nice gentle cook to it. The next thing that we need to do is get our liquid up to a simmer. So after I put in our stock and our beef, again, I cranked up the heat because we want to get this up to a gentle simmer. If you don't put this into your oven at a gentle simmer already, the temperature is never going to get right, and you're not going to get a proper cooking doneness on your beef brisket. So you really want to make sure that you let your liquid come back up to a simmer before you cover it, and then put it into your oven. So now we've got our cooking liquid back up to a simmer. We're gonna go ahead and get it directly into our 275 degree oven. So I'm gonna do that right now. Now, like I said, this is going to take anywhere between 2 and 3 hours to finish cooking. So what I ultimately will do in this instance, once you get it into the oven, you know it's going to take at least a couple hours. So I let it go for an hour without fussing with it. You want to let it get that cook going. But after about an hour, what I'll do is I'll go and check it. take it out of the oven and actually test it with a fork. So ultimately what we're looking for is fork tender. We want our fork to go easily into the meat and have it pull right back out. So it's gonna really take that time. That moist cooking environment is gonna break down that connective tissue and the extra fat that's running through that beef brisket and really dissolve it and turn it into one of the smoothest, velvetiest, most delicious beefs on the planet. You know, it turns it into magic, to be quite honest. So in a couple hours, we'll get it out of the oven and we'll show you what we came up with. All right, so our brisket's been going for just under 3 hours now. It's perfect fork tender. I'm gonna get it out of the oven and I'll show you just exactly what I mean by fork tender. Just put that here. Release our lid here. Absolutely beautiful. Come in and we'll show you exactly what I mean by fork tender. We go right into this piece of meat and we come right back out. It's exactly what we're looking for. We even had, see how it just comes right apart? It's exactly what we're looking for in terms of our brisket. Absolutely beautiful. So what we're gonna do next is we're going to take our cooking liquid and turn it into a sauce. And then I'm gonna show you how we're gonna actually go about serving this brisket. I was thinking about it long and hard about how I wanted to present this, because you could do it a number of different ways. You could shred it all apart, serve it kind of like a bowl of stew if you wanted to. You could add some root vegetables to this afterwards. You could let it sit overnight if you wanted to. Let all those flavors, you know, marinate, condense, because since it's all hot right now, as it cools, it's gonna, the meat is actually gonna soak up that cooking liquid and actually bring in more flavor to it. But what we're actually gonna make today is a braised brisket grilled cheese. So on a brioche bun, it's gonna be fantastic. So I'll get into that in just a bit. But first we need to go after our cooking liquid. So we're just gonna leave our meat in the pot for right now. And we're gonna take out just a little bit of our cooking liquid, and we wanna strain out our bay leaf and our vegetables that we had cooked through in there. We don't need to incorporate that into our cooking liquid and the sauce that we're going to make. All that flavor is already worked into our dish, so we're just gonna get enough to be able to make a quick little pan sauce here. Just give it a little tap. Beautiful cooking liquid. Keep going. We're just going to transfer that cooking liquid right into our saute pan, and what we're going to do now is we're going to reduce this. Okay, I'm going to taste it just a little bit. Want to see where we're at with our seasoning, because as I said before, as this reduces, the sodium content's going to intensify. That is right on the money. That's exactly where we want it to be in terms of flavor. The seasoning's great. It's gonna reduce down a bit. We wanna get it to a consistency called nappe, which literally means in French to coat the back of a spoon. So I'm gonna just let this sit here, let it reduce down, and get it nice and thick to a nappe consistency. All right, so our sauce is reduced down beautifully. We're going to go ahead and add some whole butter to this, which in French is called Monte au beurre. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna help finish thickening up our sauce here a bit that we took from our cooking liquid. It's gonna make it a little bit more rich and really intensify the flavor in a lot of different ways. So really nice way to finish a dish is to throw in just a little bit of whole butter. Helps finish off that thickening process, and like I said, adds a lot of richness and a lot of flavor. I'm just gonna let that cook down. You can see how we're able to coat the back of a spoon. It's exactly what we're looking for, because when we go to make our sandwich, this is going to be a dipping sauce on the side, and we want it to cling to the sandwich. We don't want it to just be kind of like an au jus, which would be sort of like French dip if you're familiar with that, but we want this to have some thick type consistency. Perfect. So I'm going to kill our heat, put this off to the side, let it rest a little bit. It smells so good. So now we're gonna go ahead and get started on our sandwich. Now, what we're using for the bread is going to be a beautiful fresh brioche bun. It's going to have some nice buttery qualities to it. It's going to go really well with our beautiful brisket. And for the cheese that I'm going to be using, we're actually going to be using some Gruyere cheese. So some nice acidity in Gruyere, has some wine characteristics to it, so it's really going to come through nicely and stand up to the fattiness and the meatiness of our brisket. So really nice melting cheese to accompany it and really round out our grilled cheese nicely. So first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually slice our brisket here. Very important is you want to cut against the grain when we talk about slicing our brisket, because we want it to remain tender. If you slice with the grain, it's going to remain very fibrous and quite tough to the tooth. So want to make sure that we get some nice slices here for our sandwich. Not too thick. Absolutely beautiful. Perfect. We'll go for a little bit more. What do you say? Want to let the customer get their money's worth. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and return our meat to our cooking liquid. Let that rest there so it stays warm. So now what we're going to do is build our sandwich. So we're just going to layer our brisket on here. Perfect. Save a little, call that a shift snack for ourselves. We did all this hard work. We should get some credit for the love. And we're going to put on our Gruyere cheese. So now our sandwich is composed. What we're going to do next is clean up our board a little bit here. Now we're going to go ahead and get some butter into our pan and actually make our grilled cheese. So now we're going to go ahead and get our pan going. So we want to have about a medium-high heat, not too high. We're going to use whole butter to actually make our grilled cheese. So as I was saying before, with regard to the milk fat that's in the butter, too high a temperature is going to scorch that milk fat and cause your butter to burn, and we don't want that. Again, we're trying to remain consistent with the nice golden brown characteristics. So I'm going to get the butter in the pan, let that start to melt. Now, I know a lot of people like to cover their bread ahead of time for making their grilled cheese. I like to get my butter melted into the pan first and then add the bread. It's just the way that I've always done it, and I feel like it has a much better outcome in terms of the consistency and the browning, and it helps you manage the temperature of your pan that much better, because you see the butter come down and melt, and you know that it's not too high when you start to add your bread. So once our butter comes down, we're going to go ahead and add in our bun here, our brioche, and then when you get it in the pan, you just want to move it around a little bit so that way it coats all the sides. And I'm actually going to do the flip right away so that way you can coat the other side. Perfect. Now what we want to do is we're going to cover it. Okay. Now what we do by covering is going to generate some steam, so it's going to help melt that cheese. Okay. So what we're trying to do is get obviously the nice crispy brown and the caramelization on the bottom of the brioche, but then we also want to make sure that we have melty cheese. There's nothing worse than going to one of your favorite diners, or going to one of your favorite restaurants, ordering a grilled cheese and soup or something like that, and they bring out your grilled cheese. The bread is perfectly toasted, and you can see the separation of the two pieces of cheese that haven't melted properly. So the one cardinal rule is make sure your cheese is melted, because that's the point of grilled cheese. So we're going to let this cook down a little bit. So we're going to do our flip here. Got some nice browning on the other side. Our cheese is coming down nicely. I'm going to reduce our heat just a little bit here and resume by covering it. Like I said, we're getting that nice caramelization on the bottom of our grilled cheese, and then we put the lid back on, generate that steam so we get a nice melt on our cheese. All right, so our sandwich is coming together really nicely. We're starting to get caramelization on the other side, nice toasting of our bread here. And one thing that I really like to do when we're doing grilled cheese, obviously in a perfect world, our pan would stay the perfect temperature all the way through, but one of the best ways to control your temperature and get that residual cooking is monitor it by just taking your pan on and off the burner, sort of the same way when you make scrambled eggs. You want to use your heat sparingly, so that way you're not overcooking anything. It's really a nice delicate balance. So since we're doing such a thick sandwich here, we really have to be mindful of the melting of the cheese and taking that time to properly cook it, but then not letting it get too dark on the bottom side of our bread. So I'm just going to give it a quick flip here so let you see what we're working with on the other side. We got some beautiful color here developing, and we're just about there. So just a couple more minutes. I'm just going to cover it up for a little bit more. That way we can get some more melt on that cheese. Our grilled cheese is looking absolutely perfect. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. See that glory? We've got the cheese starting to come out the sides here, so we're just about ready. So I'm going to take this over to our cutting board. Rest for just a second. And then we're going to plate some of our sauce here. So our beautifully thickened sauce, we're going to serve that on the side. All right, our sandwich is ready. Just gonna get gloved up here for our plating. Cut right down through. So we've got some beautiful grilled cheese for us. And we're gonna plate up here. Bang. Just like that, we've got a beautiful braised brisket grilled cheese. Enjoy.